Hello and welcome to another edition of News Analysis with me, Homa Lesgi. On this programme, we're looking into secret British files released after 3 decades, proving Israel indeed possesses nuclear weapons. But what's alarmed many is the concern that Israel would use them if it feels threatened. Has the world failed to take action on a major nuclear threat? Take a look at this report.
For decades, Israel's nuclear weapons arsenal has been the subject of heated discussions. Israel has been pursuing a policy of deliberate ambiguity, neither denying nor confirming its possession of nuclear weapons.
Rather poor.
Now documents released by Britain's National Archives show UK officials during the 1980s not only knew that Israel possessed nuclear weapons, but also were worried that these weapons could be used against Arab countries. A diplomatic cable from the UK embassy in Tel Aviv, dated May 4, 1980, warned the situation in the region was deteriorating, and with it, Israel's dangerous mood of isolation and defiance would grow. The cable says, if they are to be destroyed, they will go down fighting this time. They will be ready to use their atomic weapon. Because they can't sustain a long war, they would have to use it early. The cable was communicated 6 years before former nuclear technician and whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu reveals details of Tel Aviv's nuclear weapons program. Israel is widely believed to be the sole possessor of nuclear weapons in the Middle East. Most worldwide intelligence agencies estimate that Israel developed nuclear weapons as early as the 1960s. And in May 2008, former US President Jimmy Carter confirmed that Israel had 150 nuclear warheads in its arsenal. This while Tel Aviv, with the help of its veto-wielding ally, the United States, has for years resisted demands by the international community to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and bring its nuclear activities under the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Well, let's get more now from James Morris, political commentator in Los Angeles, Richard Millet, a British journalist in London, and Dahr, Jamail, an author and independent journalist who's joining us on the line from Texas. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being on this edition of News Analysis. I'd like to start with James Morris. James, the documents are talking about a nuclear attack by Israel, not the possession of nuclear weapons. Why does the West, especially the US and the UK, why are they acting as if they don't know Israel has a nuclear arsenal then?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for having me back on PressTV, and Happy New Year to all your viewers around the world. You have a situation where, look at Barack Obama during his first press conference, I believe, with Helen Thomas. When she asked which country in the Middle East possesses nuclear weapons, wording to that effect, and Barack Obama couldn't even answer that straightforwardly. The problem we have in America is we have a very strong pro-Israel lobby, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, and the neoconservatives who basically have the Republican Party in their grasp. And we just don't address that issue. It's a blatant double standard. The rest of the world sees it. Any American in the know sees it. And, here we are demanding that Iran give up a peaceful nuclear program by the look of it, which is in compliance with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And, Israel's basically giving the orders with that through AIPAC and its lobby in America. It's unacceptable.
Richard Millet in London, we are talking of those documents that raise concern about Israel using those weapons. What if it does feel that its mere existence is under threat? Can we be sure it won't use nuclear weapons?
Happy New Year to you, Homer.
Thank you.
I think that there's no doubt that this document, 30 years old, and Israel has never used a nuclear weapon since then. And if you think about it logically, why really would it want to? Because anything that landed in an Arab country could potentially come back on to Israel. So it is an absurd idea that Israel would ever want to use a nuclear weapon. I think Israel's main problem at the moment is not fighting against another Arab country. I mean, this document was written at the time that Israel had just made peace with Egypt. So the atmosphere in Israel at the time was buoyant. But I think the problem Israel has now is fighting terrorist organisations on the periphery of other on the edge of Israel, like Hamas and Hezbollah, which are supported mainly and financed by Iran. And Israel has to fight these organizations and take into account the civilians that Hezbollah and Hamas are fighting from within and trying to limit the damage to those civilians. And Hamas and Hezbollah don't seem to be too concerned about its own civilians suffering the consequences of their own attacks, Hamas and Hezbollah attacks on Israel.
Right, speaking of the threats that are posed by Israel and the threats that are posed to Israel, Mr. Richard Millet speaking there. I want to bring in Dahr Jamail also on the line from Texas. Dahr, what do you think? How big of a threat is Israel? I mean, because it is the one with the nuclear weapons, whereas its enemies don't have nuclear weapons, have they?
That's correct. I mean, specifically when we look at the threat of nuclear weapons, I mean, there's clearly a massive imbalance in the Middle East. Israel is, without a doubt, the only nuclear-armed country. Even Iran, for example, is still quite a ways off from obtaining a nuclear weapon, if that is indeed their agenda. But I think, ideally, of course, Israel would sign on to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and start to eliminate their nuclear weapons. And I think that would be, in the interest of real security for the government and the people of Israel, to have a balance of power, to have a non-nuclear region. But, of course, we have the opposite. As James articulated so clearly, we have a U.S. government that wholeheartedly backs everything Israel does, whether it is the nuclear program or the proliferation of illegal settlements, going down a long list, and literally has a situation where the President of the United States, along with any other person in the Senate or Congress, when questioned directly about Israel and their nuclear program, literally will not talk about it whatsoever, or will just flatly deny that it even exists. So it is a really amazing situation. But I think one thing to keep in mind when we look at the security of the region in total for everyone there's been one consistent country that has been aggressive, that has been regularly violating international laws, and has been launching attacks on civilian populations in other countries consistently over the years, and that is Israel.
Right, James, well, the documents show that Britain knew about this, the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons 30 years back, and it's been an open secret, so to speak, for the world as well. Yet what has been done to curb the threat? I mean, we were just hearing there Mr. Dahr saying that it hasn't signed the NPT, and Israel doesn't seem to be willing to sign the NPT for now. What has been done to curb this threat by the world?
Well, no, nothing's been done. I mean, you have the Australian former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, who's now the Foreign Minister for Australia, and I think the WikiLeaks have revealed that even Australia has been trying to, actually WikiLeaks had revealed that Australia's situation with Iran, it doesn't see Iran as any threat whatsoever with any nuclear weapon, and we have no credible evidence that Iran even has a nuclear weapon. I mean, they've just been pursuing nuclear power peacefully until the Israelis come up with something that they give to America to basically, persuade the neocon pro-Israel biased media to go along with war with Iran. It's just propaganda that I've seen so far. But even Australian government doesn't think Iran is a threat to the region with any nuclear weapons that it might have. And again, we don't have any evidence that they even have any. So this is just Zionist propaganda coming from the likes of your guest in England. And he talks about how Hezbollah and Hamas have killed innocent civilians. Why don't we talk about the bombing of Gaza in 2008, 2009, when Barack Obama was even silent with that as he was coming into office. He talked a good game in Cairo, but then again he was at the AIPAC conference earlier saying that Jerusalem should be the undivided capital of Israel. I mean, just he's in the tank for the pro-Israel lobby in America as well. But how many civilians were also killed in Lebanon, I'd like to ask Mr. Millet, by Israel, supposedly the most moral army in the world, as Israelis like to convey via their propaganda. And also we have the Israeli military historian Martin van Kleefeld, who'd even threatened European cities with nuclear annihilation. I mean, he's an Israeli military historian. How many times have we seen Iran threaten European cities like that, like Israel has? And we also have to bring in the USS Liberty attack and how Israel deliberately attacked American ship, killing 34 sailors and wounding 174. And that could have got us into a nuclear war with Russia. I mean, Israel is just a threat to peace in the entire region. America backs Israel to the hilt. There's no benefit for America out of that. We should be making peace with our Arab Muslim neighbors with regard to who we do business with, oil and such. And lastly, what about during the 73 Yom Kippur War? Even Seymour Hersh had said that Israel's threatening to take the whole world down with them. And also you have Tom Clancy, the writer, who'd said that Israel had even lit up his nuclear program in 1973. So that's a load of rubbish coming from your guest saying that Israel has never threatened to use its nukes. It most certainly has.
Okay, James, let's let Richard respond to this. And Richard, before you do that, the Israeli daily Haaretz reported in July secret documents affirm the U.S. will begin transferring nuclear fuel to Israel. Now, that's in violation of the NPT that forbids Washington as a member state from supplying nuclear material to a non-signatory like Israel. Isn't this encouraging proliferation rather than fighting a nuclear threat, speaking of what the world has done to curb the nuclear threat?
I don't know exactly about that report, but Israel has no obligations to join the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Countries like Iran are part of that treaty, and all the evidence points towards Iran trying to obtain a nuclear bomb. Not only is it looking for the means, but it also has a declared intention. President Ahmadinejad said that Israel should be wiped off the map. Mr. Morris talked about WikiLeaks, but as we also know from WikiLeaks that the Arab world was united in urging for there to be an attack on Iran, because the Arab countries, who are far closer to the situation and have much more to lose than Australia, know the situation clearly and feel that Iran is a major threat
Mr. Richard, the thing is
situation.
Since the programme is about the threat posed by Israel, according to the documents that have been released in Britain, so if you could just focus on this question that you believe then in your remarks that Israel, there's no need for it to sign the NPT. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, the problem Israel has is with Hamas and Hezbollah. There's no way that Israel would ever obviously drop a nuclear bomb on southern Lebanon or on Gaza. It wouldn't drop a nuclear bomb in any circumstance unless it might potentially have a nuclear bomb dropped on it. And the only situation that could possibly happen is the threat it is now under, as I have just mentioned, but it has to deal with the local situation, unfortunately, with Hamas and Hezbollah. And fighting Hamas and Hezbollah, and as your previous guest, Mr. Morris, did mention the attack on Hamas, but what he also failed to mention was the 8,000 rockets that were hitting Israeli towns and killing innocent Israelis. And obviously that doesn't concern him at all. And I would also like to remind him that there were also Christian Arabs that he should be wanting to make peace with, not just Muslim Arabs.
Okay, I'd like to pose the next question to Dahr. Dahr, do you think that justifies the US supporting Israel's nuclear program according to declassified documents?
Well, it's clearly a violation of the treaty. Let's just start there. But I want to address this amazing double standard as to why should it be that Israel should be allowed to have nuclear power and nuclear weapons, but no other country in the region, whether it be Iran or Saudi Arabia or any other country in the region, should not be allowed to have the same. But specifically, since we're talking about Iran, I think either nobody should have access to nuclear power and nuclear weapons, or everyone should, because that's the only way we're going to have a balance of power and real security. As long as this gross imbalance of power persists, with Israel being the only nuclear-armed country in the region, Israel having one of the largest militaries on the planet, the largest fleet of F-16s outside of the United States of America, and, consistently over the years being the one main aggressor in the region, that it was Hamas who was abiding to the peace pact with Israel up to the outbreak of violence in late 2008 when Israel decided to launch a full-scale attack on Gaza. That consistently the person that provokes the violence has not been Hamas, has not been Hezbollah. Typically, more often than not, in cases 9 out of 10 cases, it has been Israel. And one thing I want to point out, if the guest in London is going to consistently demonize Hezbollah and Hamas for putting in danger civilian populations and disregarding life, I personally reported on the war in Lebanon in 2006 and consistently saw an Israeli policy backed by the U.S. of going into villages, leafleting the villages saying you need to leave. We're going to bomb Hezbollah targets in this village. And then when people packed up and started to leave in buses and vans, flying pillowcases as surrender flags out the windows, those vehicles were intentionally targeted by Israel. And this did not happen one time. This was blanket policy that I saw repeatedly across South Lebanon. Of course, white phosphorus being used in civilian areas. Of course, we have the bombing of Kana, again, killing dozens and dozens of civilians, mostly women, children, and elderly. The deliberate targeting of Red Cross and Red Crescent ambulances as they were trying to reach the scene of Kana. These are just a few small examples of countless I saw just in that war. But consistently what we see is we can't logically demonize the policies of Hezbollah or Hamas and completely disregard Israel's policies that have killed far more civilians over the years and have shown a far more blatant disregard for security and the well-being of civilians in the nearby areas.
Okay, a lot of this goes back to a lot of people are saying the special relationship between the U.S. and Israel, which allows Israel to do a lot of what it's doing right now. I'd like to go to James now. I was reading, James, an article that quoted Time magazine back in 1952 and how it openly criticized the U.S. for supporting Israel's creation, I quote, at the cost of Arabs and failing to take, quote, the slightest responsibility. I mean, it surprises you when you compare that language to the current mainstream U.S. media. James, I want you to tell us, how does the special relationship between the U.S. and Israel affect the media in the West when it comes to Israel and its actions?
Well, I mean, it's like you take a look at AIPAC's influence on the U.S. government, and not just AIPAC, the other tentacles of the pro-Israel lobby, the Israel Project, the neoconservatives who pushed us into the war in Iraq, which was for Israel as well. The U.S. media is in the tank for the Israel lobby as well. You've got operatives in that media, producers and the like, who are very pro-Israel. And then you also have the intimidation factor. If anybody is critical of Israel in that media, they lose their position. Look at Rick Sanchez. Let's go back to the attack on Gaza when he actually had the courage on CNN to convey that it was actually Israel that initiated that war. I mean, Mr. Millet tries to say that these rockets that coming over from Gaza are such a threat to Israel. I'd like to ask him how many Israelis have died as a result of those rockets. And if he had his land taken, like the Palestinians continually have their land stolen, I'm sure he'd be fighting back too. The bottom line is, yes, the American media is in the tank for Israel. There's no doubt about it. You can look at the email exchanges that I had with General Petraeus, where you had General Petraeus conveying to the Congress that American support for Israel is a strategic threat. And we have to address that with regard to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And not one media entity in America covered that when he said this before Congress. And then you have the neoconservative Max Boot, who played a role in pushing us into Iraq, again, a war for Israel, who's advising General Petraeus in Afghanistan. And we see this hardcore militaristic policy and a quagmire there. Yet there's no reporting on that. And similarly, PressTV will probably be the only media channel here, perhaps Al Jazeera English as well, and maybe Russia Today, who will report about this 1980s revelation about Israel threatening to use nuclear weapons. And let me just address a couple points, if I may, with regard to what Mr. Millet had said. He talked about the Arab leaders pushing for strikes in Iran. How unpopular, or how popular, I'd like to ask him, how popular are those corrupt officials and leaders of those Arab countries, Mr. Millet? Would you say that their opinions that they cowardly expressed privately through these WikiLeaks cables are reflected by the populations of their respective countries? I don't think so. Of course those Arab leaders are in the tank for America because they're selling a lot of oil to America. They're making a lot of profit. How much do they do to help the Palestinian resistance in Gaza and in the West Bank?
Okay, let's bring in Richard on this as well. Richard, well, the thing is, Israel's wars in Lebanon and Gaza, the flotilla attack, and now its insistence to expand settlements which are termed as illegal by the UN and even the US. How much is this really helping Israel win the trust of the world public opinion and the American public opinion?
Well, I think a lot of what you've just said, unfortunately, Jamail, and what Mr. Morris has just said is inaccurate. America doesn't view the settlements as illegal, and
but it has
they
called
are
for
actually
Israel
not
to stop
illegal.
them,
if you
hasn't
look
it?
At the law, if you look at the law properly, they are not illegal. And if you want to talk about resisting or fighting back, there are ways to fight back and there are ways to resist. But the way Hamas does it is putting bomb vests on Palestinians and sending them into Israeli cafes, into Israeli discotheques, and blowing themselves and as many Israeli innocent civilians up as possible. And that is the way Hamas resists, and that is the way Hezbollah resists, if you like to call it resisting. They target innocent people. They don't target the Israeli military. They target the Israeli civilians who are out to play, out for lunch, going out to a nightclub. I don't see any denunciations coming from either of your guests of those tactics by Hamas or Hezbollah, which is absolutely unbelievable, but it's something I've come to expect. And if you talk about America being pro-Israel, well then I guess, yes it is, because most Americans identify with Israel. But if your guests would like to come to Europe, specifically to Britain, they would find a far different attitude to what is in existence in America. Okay, so the two forces are actually balancing themselves out.
Yeah, let's bring this Dahr here as well. Dahr, when it was trying to pressure Israel to stop settlements, the US came up with economic concessions. Israel rejected even a 3-month temporary freeze. Richard there referring to the settlements issue. When it comes to the US-Israel relations, who is really calling the shots?
Well, clearly it's Israel, and, you know, it consistently every year for now decades, more than 2 decades straight, every year it comes up for vote in the UN about the legitimacy of the settlements and what needs to be done, and every single year the U.S. vetoes the more than 100 other countries who consistently vote for international law to be respected and enforced when it comes to the settlements. They are a clear violation of international law. This is not opinion. I want to cite specifically international law. And the guest in London, I'm sorry, but I just doesn't seem like you're really living in reality. If we talk about who is responsible for more civilian deaths, again, I'll just cite the war in Lebanon in 2006. In that war, more than 1,300 Lebanese civilians were killed and less than 200 Hezbollah fighters. Conversely, in Israel, while certainly it's a tragic loss and a crime that Israeli civilians get killed, it was more than 100 Israeli soldiers were killed and less than 100 Israeli civilians. So just looking at the hard statistics themselves, using Hezbollah and the war in Lebanon as an example, clearly Israel has done a far poorer job in respecting civilian casualties. And I think the same can be said when we talk about Hezbollah, either in Gaza or the West Bank.
Okay,
Hamas.
Yeah, Dahr Jamail, author and independent journalist, joining us there on the line from Texas. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this edition. I'd also like to thank political commentator James Morris, joining us live from Los Angeles, and British journalist Richard Millet, live in London. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for being with this edition of News Analysis. From me, Homa Lesgi, it's goodbye.